spiritual transformation, personal transformation. And yet, have you ever given much thought to what exactly is transformation? We're working with Colin Tipping's book, Radical Forgiveness, and in this chapter 11, he very easily and succinctly summarizes what we're about in this study. Our primary mission is to transform the victim archetype and raise the consciousness of the planet. Yeah, pretty cool. But the piece that I find interesting is he says transformation is not change. It doesn't involve change. And that really caught me this week. Transformation doesn't involve change. And as I was grappling with it, I found myself reviewing one of the Bible stories. Because I remember when I was back in ministerial school, we worked with this story of Saul. And you may recognize that name. Saul became Paul, the Apostle Paul, one of the great leaders in the early Christian church. But before that, he was Saul. And Saul was a persecutor of the Christians. He was, in fact, his personal mission had to have been something similar to, let's wipe out Christianity. He was a devout Jew. He was interested in perpetrating the Jewish faith, not anything else. And he'd been given a lot of authority by the high priest to go in and really terrorize those that followed Christianity. One day, Saul is traveling to Damascus, probably on foot, as they usually did at that time, with his band of men that are carrying out these horrific things to these Christians, when suddenly Saul is surrounded, engulfed in this bright white light, so bright that he falls to his knees. You can imagine he's probably covering his eyes, trying to protect himself. And out of this light, this booming voice, which not only he, but the men that are with him here, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And Saul, asks, who is this? And the voice identifies itself as Jesus, the one that is being persecuted. And then Jesus goes on to tell Saul to continue his travel into the city. And Saul is rendered blind by this light. So 3 days later, a disciple, one of the followers of Christianity, one of the disciples, not the original 12, receives guidance that he is to go and lay hands on Saul's eyes and cure him, heal him. And Saul also has received this. Remember, Saul is a devout Jewish man. In these 3 days of blindness, he's been in prayer and been receptive, and he hears that, he's going to be healed. And at that healing, there is a transformation that happens in him. So let's look at the metaphysics, because they're kind of interesting. And in a way, they help me to understand why Colin Tipping says it doesn't involve change. So Saul represents our personal will, or what we sometimes call the false will. And anytime that the ego is involved, it's trying to approximate spirit. But it's always a little clunky or distorted, right? And so whereas real will that is more essential, part of our true nature, rises as our true nature, is more gentle, but really helps us to discern and to be with whatever is ours to do in the moment. False will is willful, it is stubborn, it's all about me getting what I want. So there is a lot of push to it, there's a lot of efforting to it. It involves a huge amount of energy and push to it. And you could also say that it's a willful person can also be rather bullying. And that's certainly what we see in Saul. And usually when someone is struck blind, that means that there is something that they're not willing to see. And certainly that could be the case with Saul. We could say that he's unwilling to see his nature because we're told that he is rejecting Jesus, which metaphysically, Jesus is the spirit within us. He is our true nature, expressing, right? And so in this story, however, instead of it representing something that he's not able to see, we see that it is a divine unfolding intended to break the belief that Saul has that he is in charge of his life, that he is, in effect, the God of his life. And instead, he is rendered powerless, helpless. And in that, there's a certain breaking open, right? Or a receptivity. There is some kind of openness that comes across Saul and allows him to receive the healing that we never quite understand as human beings, the mystery of the spirit within. But you see, spirit works from a plateau that is so different than this worldly dimension that we live in. One where it's not limited by space and time, not limited by physicality. And we learn that we're supported by something so much more than that which we think we contribute, than our false will, if you will. So my first question today is, how have you been struck blind? What are the things in your life that have unfolded to break you out of the trance that you're in charge or that you need to be in charge? You can definitely just put a word or two into the chat if you want, but it can be things like that unexpected divorce or the death of a loved one or financial disaster. You know, the list can go on and on. I was thinking for myself, it was actually the AIDS crisis and the death of so many of my friends just rendered me powerless. I was beyond stretched. And the only thing that came to me was to surrender to something greater. Because I of myself could not figure out how I could continue to be in this, what felt like a war zone to me, with all my friends passing away. So if we come back to change, notice that Saul was not asked to rid himself of anything. He didn't have to reject his false will even. There was a shift. I think I probably would have called it a change before, but really there's a shift. And in comparison, so many of us from a victim consciousness think that change is going to make the difference. You know, like if a marriage is not going well, we'll just change partners. Or if our job isn't going well, we'll just change the job. We often don't pause to look at, and what is this pointing to in me? It doesn't mean that we stay with a bad marriage. It doesn't mean that we stay in abusive situations, but we always need to look for the opportunity to transform that which we believe, that which holds us into a pattern of life. And we know those patterns when we keep saying, this keeps happening to me. Even though it has different clothes and a different personality, why does this keep unfolding in my life? If we look at the definition of what he says transformation, true transformation is, it's pretty enlightening. Transforming something does not mean changing it. That's where we've been focused. In fact, to transform anything, we must experience it fully and love it just the way it is. We don't really know what happened to Saul in those 3 days, but you can bet I'll just tell you, with transformation, there's always understanding. And the opportunity for Saul, and what I think brought about such a tremendous transformation in him, was that something about the need for his false will, his personal will, was revealed to him, something that allowed him to soften and to then open up to a new perspective, to a new way of seeing and being open to who and what he was as a spiritual being, and thus as someone who had access to essential will, a quiet, steadfast, in the moment presence that informs us as to what is ours to do now. Tipping also in this chapter reminds us that let's pull it up, Bonnie, this definition of self-hatred, or what lies behind the illusion of victimhood is the projection of self-hatred. I wanted to bring this into this talk because I was introduced to this idea years ago. And I'll tell you, it took me a long time to grok it. Really? I play victim out of some kind of self-hatred of myself? It didn't make sense to me. And I'm not sure that I'm going to be the end-all definition of it, but I wanted to just give a shot. I didn't want you to just gloss over this in the reading, because it's a big deal. Hatred comes up in all of us when we don't feel powerful. So it's related to powerlessness. And it starts very early in us. If you think about what it's like to be an infant, a toddler, then a child, even a teenager, there are many times where we feel powerless. And yet powerless is very hard to experience. And in fact, the ego coalesces around us not experiencing important things, and so one of its not important things, but overwhelming things. I mean, the ego is essential when we're a child. We need a mechanism that gets us through, that ushers us through, along with our parents, in our development so that we can live a healthy life. The challenge is that the ego doesn't really know when to stop. It's just a pattern. And so if we don't bring consciousness to it, it just continues to rule our life. And so the ego projects out powerlessness. It makes it someone else's fault, right? I am the one that has been done wrong to. I am the one that's been victimized. And if you would just stop, then I would be fine. The opportunity, when we're feeling that place of, why can't life just conform to me, is to take that deep dive. See what's really there, knowing that there's some relationship to probably powerlessness. And as we are willing to feel it, it begins to soften. It loses that charge, and we can be with it. Now, tipping goes one step further. And at first I thought, really? But as I've been working with it, it works. He says, really, if you're willing to just practice radical forgiveness, which is really saying, when someone brings up a painful feeling in you, a feeling of rejection or betrayal, or brings up that anger or the frustration, whatever it is in you, that they're really serving as a conduit for spirit. They're showing you something. And, I don't know about you guys, but relationship has been a tremendous opportunity for me to really look at my victimhood. I would say that multiple times a week I can think about Stuart, why can't he just be more like me? Why? Why do we have to go through this and through that? But the truth is, you see that I'm playing the victim. And as I have just in the last few weeks started going, he's doing this for me. He's doing this to show me my need for control, my fear of opening up to a life experience different than what I'm used to. I mean, there's just so many different ways that this can go that immediately I have felt a softening inside and a receptivity to the learning and to the healing. And so we begin to understand why Colin Tipping is saying that really what we're about here is changing this victim consciousness, transforming it, I should have said, right? I'm sure many of you caught me immediately. Shifting the perspective. Now, another thing that Colin brings in is the field. And I'm sorry, I can't remember, it's someone's field, but in spirituality, we talk about the field all the time. And when he says to not only transform the victim archetype, but to raise the consciousness of the planet, you see, we have impact, and we have impact through the field, the energetic field, which he talks, he always has his own idea of how things happen. For me, what I've always been taught is that when we become present to who and what we are, that this field of energy, we naturally connect to it. It's always there. Jesus, reminded of us when he said, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst. Well, remember, metaphysically, Jesus represents our nature. So when we become present to who and what we are, to our nature, then there is a dynamic that's even greater than us that forms in the field. And so, one of the things that I would ask you is to sense into the field right now. And you can't go wrong. I'm just going to sense into the field. And there is a certain quality of aliveness in the field here. And it's fun. There's only 6 of us in the whole building right now. But there's a sense of aliveness that I'm picking up, definitely a sense of presence, but not like that heavy-duty grounded. It's more like in the flow. I'm wondering what some of the others of you are feeling as you sense into the field. Equanimity, that's great. Yeah, thank you, Cindy. Open-heartedness, so a certain openness, a receptivity to the field. How does this impact us? Well, I'll tell you a fun story. A friend of mine called me, and as we often call our friends when we're in distress, right? She was in the middle of a house remodel, and I should be more specific, a kitchen remodel, and she had ordered a piece of stone of some kind. I don't know if it's granite or marble or whatever, but for her island, and she had paid a premium to find a stone large enough that the whole island could be done without a seam. This was her desire. This was kind of her big gift to herself in this kitchen. And she called me to say that the fabricator delivered the countertop and he had cut it too short. Someone had either given him, I think they came out and measured it themselves, but it was cut too short. And the fabricator just wanted to, was it okay if they just glue a piece onto the end? And my friend was muddled about it. Have you ever been in a kind of a muddled state, right? She's all about not being a bother and being helpful. And she was telling me, this fabricator's just getting started, and I don't want to be about causing them to go bankrupt. And this is a lot of money. And I'm sitting there on the other end, just feeling myself getting stronger and stronger. I'm feeling a lot of power. I'm feeling really grounded in my seat and not wanting to tell her what to do, although I love to tell people what to do, right? I mean, it's what's, my human beingness, but I recognize that this needs to come from her, right? And I'm sensing into the field, and I'm feeling lots of clarity and strength and that power that I was talking about. And so I just said to her, she's oriented to the field, I said, what are you experiencing in the field as you tell me this? And she started describing the very things that I was experiencing in the field, and the most amazing thing happened. She said to me, oh, I need to write my contractor and tell him that I'm not going to accept that countertop. You see, the field, the energetic field that forms between us is supportive. And it can, we were talking before the service, it can, there can be fear and upset in the field, but it will not be the only thing in the field. Because where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am in the midst. And so this field is not hindered by time or space, and I think Colin Tipping is exactly right. When we shift our orientation about forgiveness, when we stop seeing people as victimizing us and instead see them as the gift that they are through how they're showing up in our life, and we forgive them. Or in my case, most of the time when I do the deep dive into it, I feel no need to forgive them. It's all about, aha, this is what's really going on. It's about me. There is no animosity. There is nothing to forgive, and they will feel the difference instantly if they are receptive to that. They'll feel the shift. Now, it's important to recognize that the ego isn't going to embrace this kind of work. It's going to throw up all sorts of resistance to it because it is a pattern. And it doesn't really evolve, it doesn't really grow. When there is a stimulus that happens, it comes in. Unless we have come to understand it and support it, love it, as Colin says, and begin to support it in a real way. So it's important, I think, and I love the example that Colin gives in the book, that if we're not paying attention, even our spiritual practice can be taken over by the ego. That, like, a big thing that I have people that I work with do is I like to have them hit with a bat or get down and kick and hit on a mat to really get some of that anger energy out so we can see what's underneath it. But in some ways, the ego would just like you to stay angry. It just wants you to stay in that place. You can feel, or, it's okay to gossip about people. It just sort of keeps you in the pattern. It feels comfortable. So just know, it's not really going to get on the bandwagon and go, you go. Not going to be the case. And then one last thing that I'd like to bring up is, I don't think it's anything new to talk about in unity, about the fact that when we're not willing to heal, when we're not willing to forgive, when we're not willing to clear out all these strong negative emotions we have, that it's hard on our system. He talks about it impacts the subtle bodies, then pretty soon it's impacting our physical body, and we become ill. And so we recognize the importance of our spiritual work and continuing to move more out of this sense of constricted into the flow. But he brings up something that Carolyn Mace teaches, and I love Carolyn Mace. I've spent a week training with her. I think she's really on it. And I can say in the week that I spent with her, it was that constant yes. It wasn't, reading this book, every once in a while I go, no, I'm sorry. I don't agree with you, Colin. But there's a resonance that I have with Carolyn Mace. Now, he quotes something that if I've heard this before, I didn't know it. But Carolyn says that for most of us, and maybe it's most people that haven't started doing any kind of spiritual work, that 60 to 70% of their life force goes into managing the negative experiences and beliefs and, the negativity of our childhood and our early adolescence. And then she goes on to say, from that, then we spend another 10% managing our future so it won't push against our buttons, right? So we've got 70 to 80% of our life force going to managing that which is unhealed in us. Gosh, what would your life look like if that energy were freed up for you? I've become fascinated, maybe because I'm getting older myself, but I've become fascinated when they interview on radio or TV these people that are over 100 years old and they're still vibrantly alive. And we'll point to things like, oh, well, they've followed their passion, or, we've always got some excuse, right? But doesn't it also make you curious? I wonder how much resentment they really carry. I wonder how much they play the victim card. Because there's some sense that if you're 102, 105, and you're still vibrantly out there, that you've got a lot more than 30% of your life force available to you. And so we have evidence, right? We have evidence in health. We have evidence in vibrancy. We have evidence in quality of relationships that shifting this paradigm from one of playing victim to really coming into the fullness of who we are, experiencing ourselves as this spiritual being that is, when needed, loving, powerful, strong, imbued with will, full of value, compassion. The list goes on and on of the qualities that our true nature has. Qualities that support us in being with whatever situation our life holds. I think there's one more quote, probably more than one, but here's something that Colin says. By the way, Colin makes the assertion that radical forgiveness brings us to the moment. Carolyn Mace says that we're so much of our life force is going to the past or going to the future. There's very little left for the moment, which is where spirit manifests, where spirit heals our vision, for example, where these miraculous things happen called life. Colin says, we can either choose to let go of the victim archetype and bring our energy into the present through radical forgiveness, or wait for a significant trauma to force us into the now. We've all had those significant traumas. I, for one, not excited about welcoming another. It's time for us to step out of this paradigm of playing the victim, to experience a deep transformation where we begin to see that life is giving to us, loving us, inviting us into freedom, not punishing us, not hurting us. And so I want to invite you now into a time of meditation. And to prepare for that meditation, I invite you, as I often do for myself, is to plant my feet firmly on the ground, to take a nice, deep, cleansing breath, and to begin to allow yourself to settle into this moment. If you're comfortable, close your eyes. And allow yourself just to love. To love yourself for all the times you've pulled the victim card. Everybody does it. but also to love yourself enough in this moment to be ready to change your use of that card. To open to the possibility of the last thing that sort of got under your skin was a gift from that person or from that situation, a gift from God. That person was fulfilling some divine mission to wake you up, to open your eyes, to remind you that you actually, as the expression of Spirit, are not helpless, not powerless. You are all that is, capable of handling all situations, guided, loved, loving. You have the tenacity. You have the support. Everything in your life is done for you. And so we move now into a time of gentle silence, allowing the truth of our being to simply allow us to be in this moment.